create different structures depending on the size and
Tony, I think, can you check the live stream?
So this part, if we have a living thing, if it is actually like or something, but if it's
I don't see it yet. So, did you make a broadcast and click start streaming?
Yeah. Okay, we gotta start now. So.
Okay.
Okay. I think we're
Hello, everyone. Welcome back, and we'll start session 2 right now. And to kick off our session, it's my pleasure to introduce Karine Ramirez Amaro. Professor Karine Ramirez Amaro is a docent associate professor in the Division of Systems and Control at Chalmers University of Technology. She completed her PhD at the Technical University of Munich, where she was also a postdoctoral researcher. Her research focuses on assistive robotics, human activity recognition and understanding, and learning rich semantic representations. Oh, it is my pleasure to introduce Karine. Please feel free to take it away.
Thank you. Yes, I just prefer this chair, right?
Can you?
I can.
I don't think it's shared, right?
Oh, I don't actually see that.
I can't see it on my end.
You cannot.
I see it now on my side.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I think it's a very, very interesting topic, and I try to get into some of the details we're working in the lab. So my work is mostly on interpretable and explainable methods. And so this is kind of the dream, right? So we want the robot to be as autonomous as possible with less human intervention. And you have seen these kind of robots already deployed in warehouses, and the goal is, as you can see, is long horizon, right? So they need to understand what is happening, so they need to move, they need to understand how to do it and why it's happening, right? And my research is mostly focused on the how and the why, because we want to understand the interpretation of what is happening and the decision-making process of the robots, and also we want to understand why they are doing what they do, right? Because this will help us in case there's errors. So how do we represent this long horizon task? So there are different ways of doing this, and we can see it as the long horizon, from beginning to end, or we can do it as splitting the task into smaller tasks, right? So when the question is, okay, how do we split this into a smaller task? And this is basically why I think interpretable methods are very interesting, because an interpretable method is supposed to be a system that you are able to translate these principles into human-readable, understandable language without affecting the validity of the complexity of the system, right? So I will give you some examples of what we're working in explainable or interpretable methods. So I will start with the decision-making and speaking logics. Then I will talk about the causality evaluation network we're having, and then how we're making reinforcement learning a little bit interpretable. So we have this problem here. So we have a robot and it has the environment, and it wants to understand how to do a simple task of cooking pasta, right? So we have some observations. From the observations, we can have signals. From the signals, we want to transfer this into a symbolic representation. Because symbolic representations are very interesting for us to know what is happening, so keep track of what is happening. And then we want to see how could we transfer these symbols back to trajectories or motor control, so we can control the robot. So this is basically one way of collecting data, right? So we have virtual reality, and we want to have different persons collecting data. And from this collection of data, we want to understand what is happening, right? The next stage is we want to understand how a robot is going to execute everything that he just learned, right? So like here, we can see these yellow things on top of the end effectors, because this is what the robot is executing, but at the same time, interpreting its own movements. And this is important because if a movement is not as expected, this means or could mean that there is an error that is happening. So this is basically two different problems. So the first problem is observations, and this helps us to create agnostic representations, like symbol representations. And then we have another problem, which is the execution, which is an infinite space. And this actually depends on the robot embedded. So it needs to be, it cannot be agnostic. So on one hand, if we focus on the first part of the problem, which is how to represent the task, or how to learn these representations from abstractions, we can see it as a decision tree. And in a decision tree has different advantages and disadvantages. The problem is if you don't learn the correct structure, it's going to be different for generalizing. So we are taking advantage of using an ontology because we are talking about data, and we need a lot of data, and sometimes we need to learn the data smart so we can generalize. One approach we are targeting is using ontology so we can cluster the classes, and then we can make the graph or the structure of the tree a bit more general. So this generalization that allows for new objects that we have never seen in the past to actually be able to represent. So this could be generalized and can be a bit more simple. But what about one of the disadvantages of ontologies is that it's really impossible to have every single thing in a single ontology, right? So what happens when the object is not in the ontology? If the object is not in the ontology, we are actually using the advantage of LLM. So we give it to the LLM, and we also give the ontology as a context information. And then we tell the LLM, okay, find what is the most likely class that this object belongs to. And then the system should detect, where is the object that belongs, which class it belongs, right? So like here. So we are reusing everything that we learned, but with the help of the ontology, we can generalize even the objects, right? And this is how it looks in real time. In real time, we want to have a zero-shot learning. So we want to have the demonstration at the same time. We want the system to learn what is actually happening step by step. So this is what we discussed. So we have a long horizon task, but the system needs to learn step by step, because this is going to be easier for the policies when execution. Okay? So this is a very interesting approach. Then the next step is, okay, how do we transfer this into execution? So we have seen the observations, we obtain the models, and now how we put it into the planner of the robot, right? So for this, as you can see here, we have a very simplistic task of stacking cubes, but we have different users. And with different users, you see that we have different representations. People execute the same task differently. And if we segment this is done automatically, it's not any human labeler behind. So the system is automatically detecting each step and automatically creating the operators. This operator is basically the operator domain that is needed for example, PDDL. And then this also creates costs. The more you see this operator in the training, the more you can see it in the cost. And this information is automatically generated, so you don't need to engineer anything. And the system is going to now produce a plan. If it's a feasible plan, it's going to execute it, right? And then it's happening. So it's very interesting because even the system that doesn't have all the steps is able to find plans. Now, imagine that we want to explore a more complex task, which is dual L manipulation, right? For dual L manipulation, as you can see here, you depend on timing as well, right? So you need to open bottle, so you need to synchronize the movements. And this is a very, very interesting and critical part of the process. How do we get there? So for this, actually, we have a collaboration with Polytechnic of Milan, and they have a very interesting approach for kinesthetic teaching. So then what we try to do is, okay, how can we use this kinesthetic teaching for one arm to actually transfer to one arm? And then we realize that there are different problems. When you have two arms, you need to define that the sequence is not optimal, right? Because you are not optimizing your resources. Then you can see that you have shared spaces, and when you just move it to two arms, it's not as easy because then you have to here. These shared spaces need to be considered into the system so you don't have these collisions. And then the last part is like, okay, how about if we are able to exploit all the skills, right? Like you have here, and then you have unfeasible plans. So how do we fix this? So actually, what we decide is, okay, we have the kinesthetic teaching from Polytechnic of Milan, and they are using basically only one demonstration, and the system is learning a set of operators from the one demonstration, and then we actually send it to the planner here. And you can see, I mean, it's speed up, but you can see that with our system now, is able to exploit that it has two arms, and now it's able to exploit this in a faster way. And you can see we have compared with different literature, and our system is able to find the steps, 767 steps compared to 100 steps that you typically require without using our system. So we create this set of guidelines because what we want is use whatever system you have in hand, right? So we don't want you to use our system or other system, but we want to find compatibilities. How do we make these systems compatible? So in this case, we have now the same principles, but now with another system which is guiding like demonstrations using virtual reality, and we want to extract exact same things like the demonstrations for PDL. And now we have the system that is going to be executing now the alarm, right? So the outcome here is that it doesn't matter what kind of training or system you use as an observer, you should be able to have it executed as you prefer. So the next task is the causation, right? So this is basically for providing explanations. And this is very interesting because it helps us, like for example here, we obtain what is the correct sequence of steps the system needs to execute, right? But this is not enough because once you do that, then you need to parameterize. And if the parameters are not correct, you are going to get errors. And these errors will lead to new actions, etc., etc. So can we actually create a system that is able to detect these failures? As you can see here, this is a very simple task. The robot is just stacking cubes up to level 4, right? And then here is very interesting that you can see there is a slight difference between the first and second cube, right? But the next ones are correct, except for the last one. So what exactly led to the problem? Was it the last cube, the one that I just observed, or was something that it was before? And this is very interesting because it's the time-shifted evaluation that we have. So this is the pipeline. So we have the demonstration. We want to learn a set of tasks. From this task, we want the robot by itself to recognize, will I be able to execute this? Should I deploy? Or maybe I should relearn the policy, let's say, and then try to find out what is the problem, right? And then we decided, okay, let's go for causality. But the problem with causality, and I will show this picture, I like it because you depend on the observation of the data, right? And then you have this kind of data, you have the cat, and then you have this truth, and of course the cat didn't cause that, right? Because well, this is what you observe. Like in the case of the cubes, you observe that when you put the last cube, the tower failed, and that could indicate that the problem is the last cube, but it's actually not true, right? So we have to be careful with causality. So we have our code available in case you are interested. So basically we have demonstration, we have simulation, and we have lots of simulation, different kind of possibilities, and we have parameters in the problem of stacking two cubes, like we have the height, and we have the left and right, different parameters, and we also included color. And we want the system to learn this causal graph by itself. We want to do anything manually. And of course, as expected, the color should not be considered as part of the causal problem, right? And it was good because our model didn't learn that. So we learned this causal model, and then you attach this probability distribution of the probability like we put here. And the next problem is, okay, sim to real. How accurate is the model that I learned from simulation in the reality? And then you can see here, this is the models we learned in the causal model. So these are the priors, the probability distributions from the graph. And this is basically the probability that the system is trying to execute, right? So what this means is the robot in the reality is of course targeting the center of the cube because it knows that the center of the cube is going to lead to a clear success. Problem is, in the real system, you depend on perception system that is accurate, you depend on the actuator is actually accurate, and there's a lot of parameters that they are not accurate. So even though the model tells you go to the middle, you probably will not get to the middle. And if you don't get to the middle, then the next cube needs to adapt to this problem so it actually succeeds with the overall task. And for that, we need prediction. So the robot needs to execute the first task, observe what happened, and then predict if it's going to succeed if it's continuing with this step. right? If it's continuing with the probability that you learned before. So, like in this case, you see here, this is the system that is learning and is making decisions step by step. So here is a slightly difference here, but our system is not a perfect cube, but still standing, right? Because the road is predicting that if it's continuing with this offset, it's going to fail after some time, and it's basically trying to correct. So the problem with causality is, of course, it's very difficult to generalize to different problems. So this is basically something we were touching here, is how we learn, like for stacking one cube, can we generalize to 2, 3 cubes, etc. And it turns out it's not that easy, because when you stack the third cube, for example here, you depend that the previous cube was correctly stacked. If it's not correctly stacked, then it's going to be very, very complicated to succeed, right? So what we obtain here is like the probability you obtain, or the distribution you obtain from the cube 1 is going to be a good prior to learn actually the second cube. And then in this case, we have dropping objects like a ball into a sphere, or into a glass, or a ball. And then we say, okay, what about if we add a new object container? And this is basically what we're trying to generalize the risks. Right. So then we say, okay, how efficient is the data that we're learning from these causal variation networks? And as you can see, as you can know, causal networks are very, very hungry of data. For example, from simulation, you need maybe 1 million training simulations, and then you need 8,000 samples to test this model. This is impossible to get into a real system, because you will not be able to have the robot unless you have a parallel system, 2 years or whatever. So what we are proposing is we're using the simulation to learn the model, and then we of course test how much can we use this into the real data. And then we have this, this is something that my student is working on, She was not able to come here with visa issues, but she has a poster here outside, and we'll be presenting later. So this is basically to propose like a benchmark. How do we create data sets from real systems? So we are releasing our data set from the real system to test causal variation networks. And we are also proposing how to evaluate this, because it's very not benchmark. Right? So we need some kind of criteria to evaluate this. So this is basically something I will be showing in the poster, so I will not spend more time there. So the last part is the reinforcement learning. So we have the reinforcement learning, and we want to make it a little bit more interpretable. So if we have seen this from the beginning, right? So we can learn the whole task of stacking cubes, or we can learn smaller tasks. And the advantage of learning the smaller tasks is we need the execution, right? So we need to learn the execution. On the execution, everything can happen, right? You can have a plan, but the plan, if there's an error in between, the plan will not succeed at the end, right? So you need to adapt this plan. And this is very challenging for reinforcement learning. So in reinforcement learning, you have the normal horizon task, and you learn the system like that. We use a state-of-the-art algorithm here, and it's not even able to stack one cube, right? But what we're proposing is, okay, instead of trying to learn a whole stacking one cube, let's try to focus on smaller tasks. And this is basically what we decided to start. So we have a short, so we have the MVP here, and then we have the symbolic representation here, and we are combining these two. The symbolic representation is basically using the VDDL library to construct, to enhance the NDP definition. So we have the typical NDP definition, but now here we are proposing to include the information of the state, of the observation, the effect of executing the action, and also the operators. Like here, you have the action, you observe what is the observation after executing your reinforcement learning algorithm, and then you observe the effect. So if you can see here, we are combining this part, which is the symbolic representation of this observation of my environment. Then I will use the reinforcement learning to actually execute the policy. And finally, I observe what is the observation of the environment as a symbolic representation. And this information actually is shaped as a reward function that comes back to the policy. So we're helping the reward system to get context from the environment. And as you can see here, we have the observation. You can observe velocities, trajectories, and effectors, whatever. And what we are saying is, okay, we are going to see the observation as symbols because then we can use planning. Then we have the preconditions. And this is actually allowing you to know which operator should be used to execute the policy. Then it's going to execute the policy in the low level. And after that, you are going to observe the high level, which is the symbolic representation. And this is shaping how the reward, or how the policy should be rewarded. We believe that the reward needs to be adapted to how efficient the policy, the effective the policy is, right? So this is basically the system that we're proposing for making it more interpretable. And as you can see here, the reinforcement learning algorithm is using the policies, or the library of policies that we learned, and now is automatically by itself defining which operator, which policy to execute at each step, right? So as you can see here, we have operator 3, 4, 1, and so it's switching between the operators. So this is kind of the skills of the skills the system learns, the policies. And then here you can see that even though you can find errors during the execution, the system itself is able to recover because it's adaptable, right? And then here you also see that we can generalize to other tasks like inserting the cube into the different colors. And then we say, okay, can we exploit this a bit better? So in the previous case, we didn't use any PDDL for the planner, so the system by itself was creating its own planning. And here in the next work, we actually use PDDL to narrow down the search and to see, okay, can we execute it better, right? So as a next step, so this is one way to make a reinforcement learning a little bit more interpretable. But what about the rewards? So one of the problems we see in the reinforcement learning is how the definition of the rewards, right? And then we start exploring the VLMs. And the problem is that you have the observation and you also have the text, right? Open door, closed door, etc. The problem is you have an end-to-end, so you have long horizon task again. And our hypothesis is like our system, or the system, should also be rewarded when it's doing the right things. Not only till the end, but also intermediate steps, right? Like we have here. So we're proposing this kind of algorithm. So we have the VLM, which is this color that is using the observations from the images and also the text. And then we are also telling the system, hey, how close were you in the trajectory, so direction, and also temporal information. So we think this combination of these two things maybe will not improve the accuracy, but it definitely improves the number of data you require to train the algorithm, right? As you can see here, this is these red examples here represents our system with the directional information and temporal, and the others are like the classical ones, right? And you can see here the system is actually learning kind of fast what it needs to do, right? By combining this direction. And we also have a test line with different algorithms, the classical ones. And you can see that, like for example, 4, which is only the positional reward. So now we have position and direction, so which is like a temporal information. Right. So we have stacking cubes, then we have this smaller tasks, and this is basically what I was showing here, the previous one here. You don't reward from the beginning to the end, but you make some sparse rewards, so more rewards on the way, right? Yes. So I give you some very quick examples of what we're working on. I will be outside to discuss more about the explainability for the dataset that we just releasing. So here is the QR code for the dataset of the robot for causal assistance that is in the poster outside. And of course, we have the code for both the causality model and the reinforcement learning. We are currently working on the code for the reinforcement learning with VLMs, which I just presented. Right. And I would like to thank my team and of course our collaborators on agencies. And I would like to invite you all to come to Cancun. So we're organizing this system integration conference, and it's very interesting because how many of us have been having problems with integrating our systems into real hardware, right? So this is basically, we still have opportunities for you to join us. So we have late-breaking results on October 15, and please join us. It's going to be in January, and 11 to 14, so it's perfect. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Corinne, for that wonderful talk. We have time for a few questions. There is a mic in the middle of the room. Feel free to come on up. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for the interesting talk. I'm wondering if you can share a bit more about your ideas on how these operators can be defined. Because, of course, they are learned, as you explained, but you are labeling them so like make them categorical, like unusual. And there are some tasks that can be realized by, and the same task can be realized by different operators. But you're already kind of constraining this to these specific operators that you learn. And if you use VLMs and solutions like that, you can imagine that the same operator can be named differently and have different structures. So can you explain a little bit more how to tackle that?
Right, yeah, this has always been the problem. But this is basically why we started the collaboration with Polytechnic of Milan, because they also have a different set of operators. So just yes, so the question is, how can we better define the set of operators that we use in the system? So, I don't think there is a simple answer to that. For the causality, for example, you need some requirements. So you need to understand that you're going to be able to observe and that you are all able to have enough data, right? How do you define that? It depends on the problem. But for the executions here, here, this is a very interesting collaboration because they have this kinesthetic teaching and they also have this set of operators. The interesting thing is we sat together and we said, okay, how do you define the operator? So in here, if you see, they are pushing a button to indicate when the task or the operator start and end. Of course, the naming is done manually. When we did an individual reality, we had learning behind, and then automatically, you don't need a person to label manually, but the system will automatically, using the velocity, the objects in the environment, detect, okay, there is a change here, I have this name, and equal to name. How to learn these new operators is very, very complicated. But then, yes, the question is, how do you do this so you can generalize to the different problems, right? And this is what we started exploring with the ontologies. We want to create an operator that is generalized to also different objects. So you don't have to solve with this every engineering, every time.
All right, great. Well, let's thank Corinne one more time for the wonderful talk, and we'll move on to the. And we'll thank you, and move on to our next speaker. Yes. You can keep it here if you want to charge it more.
No, it's okay. Okay, it's better than before.
Okay, cheers.
Just before I forget. No problem.
Okay, perfect. It is my pleasure to introduce Yuki Nagai. Professor Yuki Nagai is a project professor at the International Research Center for Neurointelligence at the University of Tokyo, where she leads the Cognitive Developmental Robotics Lab. Her research integrates cognitive developmental robotics, computational neuroscience, and assistive technologies using computational methods to investigate the neural mechanisms of social cognitive development. It's my pleasure to introduce Yuki Nagai. Please feel free.
Thank you for the great introduction. And it's my honor to present our work in these communities. And my research there lies in the intersections of the rote learning and the child learning. And I'd like to introduce some ideas coming from the developmental psychology and the neurosciences, and how we can utilize such ideas for designing more efficient rote learning. Let me start with this brief introduction of our research activities. My research group are aimed at understanding the human intelligence, not only just designing the robot learning system, but then by designing such a computational model, we try to uncover the underlying principle of the child development or child learning. So we have been conducting the 3 lines of research. One is to design the neural network model for robot learning, the top right corner, and we also analyze directly the human behaviors, like how the children learn some object manipulation through the interaction with the caregivers. We also measure the brain activities to understand what kind of the neural activities are involved in their learning mechanism. And also we design the assistive technologies for the developmental disorders. Some of the children with the developmental disorders have difficulties in the social interactions. So we can utilize the ideas and knowledge from their computational studies for better assisting their such children with developmental disorders. And today I'd like to explain how the insight or the knowledge from the child development can be utilized for the robot design, the robot learning method. As you know, the human child development is very complex phenomenon. In that very early stage of development, they have quite limited abilities. They don't even know how they can control their body, but then they gradually learn to control their body and also achieve the intention of the behaviors. And then finally they can also learn to collaborate with others. But the question is how they can really learn this kind of different behavior changes, and also how limitation to the capabilities can be also the benefit for their learning, which is very closely related to the theme of this portion, how the resource-based learning can also achieve the child. And then my research question lies in what's the unified principle for the cognitive development. We know that the children first acquire sensitive capabilities, and then based on these abilities, they start learning to communicate with others. So the first question is what the unified principle of the human learning can really be this kind of continuum development. And the second aspect of the question is whether this principle can also explain the diversity of development. We can observe quite diverse behaviors in the child learning. There is no optimal solution, optimal behavior in child development. The different children show the different behaviors, which are also very important for their cognitions. So the question is whether this unified principle can explain not only the continuity of the development, but also the diversity of the development. If we can find out such a principle, then of course we want to integrate such ideas into robot learning so that the robot can also show that efficient and also continuous development. And then we first look at the neuroscience studies. Of course, there are many neuroscientists who also try to understand the principle of human brain. And the researchers have been suggesting that the predictive processing seems to be the key function or key mechanism of the human brain, which can explain the unified self-development. And then here I illustrate the key ideas. The key idea is that the brain does not simply rely on the incoming sensory signal from the world, but always make the prediction about the world. And then by combining and integrating these top-down predictions from the brain internal model and also the bottom-up sensory signal from the world, they measure their brain measure the prediction errors, which should be minimized through the learning. Here, for example, that during the perception, we of course utilize the visual input or audio input, many sensory signals, but we don't simply utilize such an incoming sensory signal. Our brain always makes a prediction and then integrate the prediction with the incoming sensory signal. And then if we, for example, see a quickly different perceptual signal from our prediction, we can act on the environment to change the world, which result in a different sensory signal. And another important point here is that when we integrate such two signals, top-down and bottom-up signal, the brain follows the base level. Here, the predictive signal is placed as an outlier, and then the incoming signal is the likelihood. And the posterior, or the perception, is generated by integrating the prior prediction and the likelihood, the sensory signal. So here, the important point is that each signal has a different precision. For example, if we don't have so much knowledge about the world, we have to more strongly rely on the incoming sensory signal. On the other hand, if we have a lot of knowledge about the world, we don't need to care so much about the incoming sensory signal, but then we can just follow our prediction. Let me give you one very simple example to demonstrate how your brain also works as a predictive machine. Here I want you to focus on the two blocks here, block A and block B, and please compare the brightness or the color of these two blocks. The question is, which block will be lighter? I guess many of you think that, even I think that the B looks a bit lighter. Most of the participants have their subjective experience of the big block B is the color is lighter. But this is not true in terms of the physical level. I just now extracted only these two blocks. Now you can directly compare the color of these two blocks. And now you realize that these two blocks have exactly the same luminance. There is no trick here. I just extracted these two blocks from the left side. Now you can see that these two blocks are exactly the same place. What happens here? If your brain just simply utilizes the visual input, you should be able to recognize that these two regions have exactly the same luminance. But then illusion happens because your brain has a prediction about the world. Your brain knows that, okay, the region B, the block B is in the shadow. Although this is not white, like a block, but it should look a little bit lighter even in the shadow. That's your brain predictions. That's why that your brain often have this kind of optical illusional effect. So our idea is that we can utilize this mechanism also into our system so that the robot can benefit from this kind of prediction system. To do so, we first extended the theory of the predictive processing so that it can also utilize the embodied experiences in the world. Here, I named it embodied predictive processing for the cognitive development. And then we extended with the three aspects. The first one is that not only the brain, but also our body develops through our sensory motor experiences, which happens especially in the child development. And then the signal, the top-down signal and the bottom-up sensory signal gradually improve the precision of this model, which gradually refine their internal model. The second point is that the large model integration. Here the body plays a common reference frame for integrating the large model sensory signal. And here the signals is not only about the vision and the oral tactile, which are corresponding to the exception, but also the perception and the interception. The interception is the sense of internal one, like the heartbeat, breathing. We have been developing this kind of large model, the predictive processing model in the world, in order to see how our bodily internal state will also affect our cognitive behaviors. And the third point is that through the body, the human children can interact with the social environment. And then the through social interactions, they can learn their representation from the other. This is also an important aspect. And now I want to emphasize that these ideas of their motivational constraint can be with a benefit for the child development, and also it can be closely linked with the ideas of the situational learning. Because the human children have the very limited capabilities in the early stage of development, but this early stage of the constraint can facilitate the learning. Let me give you one example. The motivational constraints in the child development are well-known phenomena, and the researchers have been suggesting that these constraints can lead to the more efficient learning. For example, their visual acuity is much less in the early stage of the development, but this lured image actually helps children to extract more important information from the visual input. Or also the motor control gradually improves with the age, start with their very gross motor skill to the change to the fine motor skill. This also allows the children to first explore globally and then to refine their motor skills. And then finally the brain, for example, the memory capacity gradually changes, which is also a benefit for their child development, especially for structured learning. And actually this idea has been studied in our community, the developmental robotics community, for many, many years. And as some of you may know that these ideas is also now introduced to the machine learning community. And they named it as curriculum learning. Here the idea is that for example, you can change the number of the training data depending on the learning stage. In the early stage, you provide only the less number of the image for training the network model, but gradually increase the number of the training data so that the network can gradually learn more complex tasks. Or also, inspired by the brain development, you can change the structure of the neural network model, starting with a smaller layer or the more simpler network model, and then gradually increase the complexity of the network, which can also nicely extract more important information from the early stage of learning. Now that I think that this is a very nice framework for this learning, but then I want to introduce here in my talk that how we can also design this idea in a more neural-plausible way, using the task of the drawing that development. The reason why we have looked at the drawing is that this is often utilized in child developmental study, because the drawing becomes a good window into the child world model. Here are some examples. In this experiment, the experimenter asked children with different age to draw a certain object. For example, this is a cup, starting with a very simple square, but gradually get more complex structure with the increase of the age from 4 years to 9 years old. If you compare this cup with the phone, you can recognize that the phone at 4 years old are exactly the same with the cup in terms of the representation or the drawing. Of course, I imagine that the children at 4 years can distinguish the cup and the phone in the visual information processing. But then when we ask them to produce such their representation look exactly the same to each other, indicating that their world model must be very, very immature in this early stage. And another example showing that how the human body is represented in the brain. You may recognize that some children draw arms and legs directly from the face. There is no torso here, for example, or this here as well, suggesting that the human face is much more important for children. And then torso, although the size of the torso is much larger than the face, but it does not have the important information in their social interaction. That's why in their world model, the brain model, they often ignore certain related parts. So, and another interesting example is the comparison between the human children and the chimpanzees. In this experiment, the experimenter gave a paper on which the part of the figure is already shown. For example, here the contour of the chimpanzee's face and also some features of the face is also already given. But here the left eye is missing, or this case as well. The question is what the children and the chimpanzees would draw on these illustrations. The most interesting finding here is that the only human children could add the missing parts. Here the left eye was missing, and then only human children at a certain age could add the missing parts. But none of the chimpanzees, including the adult chimpanzees, could add the missing parts, which suggests that only human children or only humans could acquire the ability to make predictions, but the chimpanzees did not acquire such prediction abilities. So we thought that this is a good example or a good task design which can assess the prediction ability in the human development. So then we have conducted the experiment like this. We utilized a tablet on which only the part of the figures is already shown, and then the question was similar to the previous experiment. What children will draw on this tablet? Here, this boy added the contour of the face and also the hair of this person's face. But then if the child is too young, they cannot really add these parts, which suggesting that although they should be able to recognize the human face, but their internal model is very immature. That's why they cannot make a prediction. We have collected the data from more than 100 children, and then we statistically and quantitatively analyze the quality of their drawing. Here are some examples that we observe, like scribbling patterns, tracing the lines, coloring, and free drawing, and then composition drawing. Here you can see the different colors indicating the different drawing patterns. And I skip the details of the analysis, but you can basically see that the developmental trajectory of the younger children to the older children. At the bottom left corner, you can see that drawing by young children. You can mainly see the kind of scribbling patterns. As you can imagine that the young children still do not have the clear model of the world, so they often do this kind of scribbling behaviors. On the other hand, the older children, like 99 months old or 70 months old, could add the missing parts to complete their drawing. The interesting point here is not only the developmental trajectory, but also the individual diversity. For example, this chart just traced the existing line. He did not add the missing parts, but then paid strong attention to the existing line, suggesting that this chart brain has a very strong biases to the incoming sensory signal, but it cannot utilize its own prediction. On the other hand, this child, at 6-8 months old, he often drew like an irrelevant feature, like this kind of triangle, square, circle, something like that, regardless of the given signal, which might correspond to the very strong biases in the top-down prediction. That's why that we can see this kind of drawing, diverse drawing behaviors. So inspired by this study, we finally designed the Lobotar model, and then to see how the modification in the network model could explain the developmental change and also the individual diversity in the drawing behaviors. Let me first show the result. So we utilized the neural network model I will explain in the next slide, and then we modified just the two parameters. One has a very normal linear model indicating that the local network model integrates both the top-down signal and the bottom-up sensory signal in a balanced way. In this case, the robot were very successful in drawing the competition patterns. In contrast, when we manipulated the parameters to the hyperlinear patterns, then the robot often fails in achieving conventional scripting patterns. So let me show you more details of the network model. The network model is very, very simple. It's just a simple recurring pattern of a network model, and then it learns the drawing as a trajectory by these trajectories. One important extension of the recurrent network model is the Bayesian inference model, which can manipulate the precision of the top-down signal and the bottom-up signal. For example, if we increase the precision, reduce the variance, then the network becomes more hyper wire network using more strongly the prediction. In contrast, if we reduce the precision of the prediction, then the network becomes to more strongly utilize the incoming sensor signal. With this manipulation, we try to understand how the parameters will affect the learning result. Here at the learning training data, we have utilized a very simple problem patterns which can be compared to the charting and then here is a result. So we have manipulated the two parameters. The first one is the precision of the incoming sensor signal, and the second one is the precision of the down predictions. When the network has a very low precision for both signals, the network often fails in achieving the desired task. It's kind of like a failure in the learning. But we wanted to observe this kind of failure in order to understand why the young children also fail in achieving the cognition goal. Only when the network had a very high precision for both the top-down prediction and the bottom-up sensor signal, the network was very successful in achieving the desired pattern of the cognition drawing. And then, interestingly, if we have a very strong biases either to the incoming sensor signal and top-down prediction, we could observe like a diverse pattern, like the misinterpretation of the drawing target or the tracing patterns, which could also observe in the chart behaviors. We believe that this kind of imbalanced precision, the top-down prediction, and the bottom-up sensor signal can nicely explain how the chart gradually acquire their internal model, and then how they can more efficiently learn such an internal model by adjusting their own prediction and the incoming sensor signal. So let me quickly summarize what I talked today. So the idea here is that inspired by the chart development, we can design more efficient learning for the robot. Here the idea is called embodied predictive processing, which integrates the top-down predictive signal and the bottom-up signal based on the precision of these signals. And then we observe that the resource rational learning can be achieved by integrating these predictive coding abilities. When the robot has a very limited training data or learning capacity, we can minimize the learning effort by adjusting the parameter of the precision and also the learning network model. So with these ideas, we hope that we can design, although our task was very simple, but then this idea can be applied to any kind of task. So like object manipulations or the working behaviors. So I hope that these ideas also can be utilized for your robot learning experiment. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Yuki, for that wonderful talk. We have time for some questions. We have a mic in the middle of the room, so please feel free to come up and ask some questions. I can start the questions. I was curious about the experiment you showed where the drawings changed as the children got older. And it showed that there's some representation that changes as the children get older. And you mentioned something earlier in your talk about active inference, where interacting with the world. So I was wondering, thinking about the types of data or perception that the children were experiencing over those ages, is it just a matter of collecting more observations, or maybe this active inference, interacting with the world, would lead to those better representations? Just wondering if you had thoughts to share.
Thank you for your questions. I think actually adding the missing parts is motivated by the active inference, because the ideas of the active inference is to minimize the prediction error by changing the world, by acting on the environment. In this case, that they first see the part of the figure, like for example, only the contour of the face, and then their brain detects the prediction error between their model of their face and also the incoming sensor, which is only the contour. And then completing the missing part meaning that they utilize it for the prediction to minimize the prediction error. That here error is that the inner features are missing. So by adding the inner features, they can minimize the prediction error. So I think this convolution drawing is a good example of how they develop the active inference abilities with the sensory experiences. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Any other questions for Yuki? Okay, I think with that, we'll move to the next speaker. So let's thank Yuki one more time for a wonderful talk. Thank you. Yes, so the next speaker will be virtual, so if you'll give us a few moments to get set up.
I can introduce him while you set it up.
Yes, please. And then I think the audio I will use through the HDMI. Does Tiamin have host privileges to share?
I think click enable it for everybody though.
Yes, but I'm no longer host, so I can't check.
Oh, so maybe you are host. While we are setting it up, let me briefly introduce Tianmin. He'll be a virtual speaker. Tianmin Xu is the director of the Social Cognitive AI Lab and an assistant professor in the Department of CS at Johns Hopkins University, where he also holds a joint appointment with the Department of Cognitive Science. His research goal is to advance human-centered AI by engineering machine social intelligence. He approaches this from an interdisciplinary perspective, connecting machine learning, computer vision, robotics, and social cognition to build intelligent systems that can understand, reason about, and interact with humans in real-world settings. Tianmin, can you hear us?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, Tiamin, can you hear us?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I don't think my audio is coming through. Let's see here.
I can't hear you. I just don't know if you can hear me.
Hi, Tiamin, can you hear us?
Yes, but I don't know if
I think then the audio from the computer, we're trying to get out to the room.
There is also an audio.
Oh, okay. So 1 second, we're working on the... Okay, that's a good sign.
Tianmin, could you say something?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for the kind introduction. Unfortunately, I cannot travel to Korea, but I really hope that I will be there in person. All right, so I'm gonna can you see my slide?
Yes, if you'll give me 10 seconds to optimize for showing your screen on the display here, yeah. Okay, I think we're good on our side, so please feel free to take it away. Yeah, thanks, Tiamin.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thanks. So, today we're gonna talk about some of our recent work on how we can scale up model-based mental reasoning for a proactive but also resource rational, efficient, human-robot collaboration. So, all right. So, human-robot collaboration in real world can be, for example, assisting humans or teaming up with humans in factory situations. But in what kind of scenario you're going to work on, you have to make sure the robot you're going to build, they first understand humans. So this kind of famous cartoon on the cover of New Yorker a couple of years ago. In this cartoon, you can see the robot is actually quite physically capable. It can build this wonderful paper tower, but it's not really what the human wants. And in the end, it's not really helping human. In fact, it created a problem. Now you don't have papers to write anything anymore. But there's this question about what is the kind of human understanding that we really want the robot to have. So to show that, I'm going to show this one simple example. So if I show this image and ask you if this person on the right-hand side helping, unfortunately I cannot see your response, but I will suppose that no one will say yes. Well, this is clearly someone playing a prank. About 2 years ago, when the first multi-model version of ChatGPT came out, I tested on this simple question. It generates very impressive text description, but even though the actual recognition was correct, the intent recognition was on the other hand totally wrong. So I want to just use this very simple example to demonstrate that to understand human, it doesn't just mean that you want to recognize action accurately. What you want to do is to really reason about the hidden mental variables, such as a person's goal and belief that drive this observable action you can observe from whatever kind of input you can get. So we call this ability theory of mind reasoning. So for instance, to be able to understand the situation depicted in this image, you can recognize the mental state of the person on the right-hand side, including her goal and belief. You also recognize that the goal, her belief was actually not the actual physical state. So she had actually a false belief. And crucially, the false belief was caused by action taken by the person on the right-hand side. So by gradually building out this more and more complicated mental repetition for the people in the image, then you can start to understand what's actually going on here. So in recent years, people are very excited about the potential of deep reasoning capacity in language models, and have many studies that try to test whether or not language model can't do deep reasoning. But the kind of scenarios they use is quite simple. You use this kind of text question answer benchmark to evaluate whether language model can achieve human-like kind of performance on these simple tasks. But it's really, really far away from the kind of scenario that you want robot to reason about in real world. Even if it's just a home robot that's going to only do things in your house. You don't really have anyone write these very simple short text questions for this robot to reason about the person's mental state. So instead, the robot actually really have multi-model inputs. And this multi-model input capture not only simple state, simple action, but really complicated real-world scenarios and very long-term kind of human activities. So what I want to argue is that really this kind of simple text-based human reasoning is not really useful for building robots that can cooperate with humans in the real world. What you want the robot to have is embodied multi-model human reasoning. So, for example, the robot should really have this capacity to form a coherent mental picture of others based on multi-model inputs, including video, text, speech, whatever you can get. But more than that, the kind of reasoning is not really the downstream task. The human reasoning really is only an initial step. Once you get the mental states of others, then you should use this reasoning result to support your planning in order to interact with humans better. So I'm going to show some of the recent steps we have taken towards building a really robust and also efficient embodied multi-model human reasoning for cooperative robots. So the first thing we have done here is to build this multi-model human reasoning question answering benchmark, where we show a video of person's behavior in a household situation. We can also show the text distribution about the environment and action taken by the person. Then we can show you the video or the text of both video and text to a model and ask the model to answer the question about this person's mental state. We use our previous simulation, which is on social, to create a large set of human activity videos in a household environment. and then generates hundreds of questions about a person's belief or goal. So here's one simple example. So in this scenario, you have a person called Jennifer. So I want to show you two keyframes and some relevant text from the four inputs. So in these frames, you can see Jennifer right now is walking towards a candidate located in the living room. From the text, you can know that inside microwave there are two cupcakes, and inside cabinet there's a bag of cheese among other objects. But crucially, you won't find any cupcakes inside the cabinet. So the question is, if Jennifer has been trying to get a cupcake, which one of the following statements is more likely to be true? A, Jennifer thinks there isn't a cupcake inside cabinet. B, Jennifer thinks there is a cupcake inside cabinet. Now I've really shown the Guangzhou's option here, which is B. But the question people think why B is true, more likely to be true. Well, if the goal for Jennifer is really to get some cupcake, and Jennifer actually doesn't believe there's going to be a cupcake inside cabinet. There's no reason for Jennifer to actually go to the cabinet. Jennifer should actually search other locations to try to find the cupcakes, right? So this is one of the examples where the belief of Jennifer is not consistent with the true state, but that's how you can actually interpret Jennifer's behavior. Here's another example. So we also can extend this to multi-agent scenarios. So for example, we can infer a person's social goal in interaction with others. So social goal here could be either helping a person or hindering a person, just like the image I showed you before. So here we have two people now, Kevin and Jessica. So Kevin asks Jessica this question: have you seen the magazine? Jessica said yes, it's in the cabinet in the bedroom. So Kevin believes that, goes to the cabinet, opens it, unfortunately could not find the magazine in the cabinet and closes it without grabbing anything. So the question here is that if Jessica actually knows what is inside the cabinet in the bedroom, which one of the following is more likely to be true? Jessica is trying to help Kevin, or she's actually trying to hinder Kevin. Well, I think here in our human study, people will choose B 100% time because if Jessica actually knows where things are, but it's going to mislead Kevin into go to this wrong location. Clearly, the intention here is not to help Kevin. Jessica is probably lying, so to hinder Kevin. All right, so this is just some example of the kind of multi-model reasoning you can do in like a household situation. Now, experiment we show the very strong performance from human. So the question is how we can actually engineer kind of machine learning models to also reach human level kind of such reasoning using based on multi-model inputs. From current study, we know that the reason why people can robustly understand other people's mental states is because we have this kind of training model of the physical world and agents in our mind, which can support a model based on reasoning about how agents act with respect to physical constraints. A very simple instantiation of this kind of agent model and world model is that we have this agent model that sits on top of world model, representing how agents plan its rational actions based on its knowledge about the world and also its mental states, such as goals and beliefs. You can then use this agent model in a recursive way to understand other people's mental states. So let's say you want to build a robot to watch a human's action, infer human's mental states based on the observed human actions. So the robot itself has this level 1 agent model, which approximates human behavior using a lower level agent model, a level 0 agent model. And so this becomes an approach that's called Bayesian inverse planning. The idea here is that in order to infer human goal and belief based on observed human actions taken at certain physical state, we're going to do this mental simulation about the human using this level 0 agent model to approximate what human actually will do condition on some kind of hypothesis about this person's goal and belief. So if you have some hypothetical goal and hypothetical belief about a person, you can then use this generative model to generative agent model to kind of approximate what kind of actions the person will do. If the simulated action is very consistent with the observed actual human actions, then you can know this hypothetical goal and hypothetical belief will be likely to be the true goal and true belief of the person. So this kind of forward simulation process is really the kind of key to leverage this generative agent model to reason about why people do certain things, condition on your hypothesis about this person's mental state. One of the problem here is that for different kind of theorem reasoning problem, you might need to have different kind of agent models. So for example, in the single agent belief inference example I showed before, to reason about why Jennifer takes certain actions, you need to understand, the action condition on hypothetical belief and hypothetical goal, and that can be formulated by compound DP as your agent model. However, in the social goal inference, now you are considering interaction between two agents. Pump DP is not going to be sufficient. You need interactive pump DP or I pump DP. And so especially in this case, you need to have two-level kind of pump DP. For example, to be able to reason why Jessica saying this utterance to try to lie to Kevin, you need to understand not only Jessica's mental state, but also Jessica's belief about Kevin's mental state. So then you really have this two-level kind of recursion to represent how Jessica thinks about Kevin's kind of mental state. In more complicated cases, for example, you want to answer questions such as, where does Alex think, Sally thinks, Anne thinks the milk is, then you need even higher order kind of interactive pump DP. Traditionally, this is done by humans. So researchers, given a specific problem in a specific domain, come up with different kinds of agent model to try to reverse engineer humans' kind of mental state inference in that specific problem in that specific domain. But this is really not a scalable kind of approach. Of course, you can try to always use the most complex kind of agent model for any given theorem reasoning problem, but again, that's not resource rational. It's not going to be very efficient. So in our recent work, which was recently accepted to news, we proposed a method called AutoTOM that can discover the minimum kind of agent model necessary for any given theorem reasoning problem. So given any kind of theorem reasoning problem, we can first try to extract observable variables such as sequence of states and sequence of actions at different time steps. Then we can propose the initial kind of minimum kind of mental model of agent model. For this to interpret this agent behavior described in the question. So in this case, we're going to propose only a small set of mental variables. But particularly in this example, we can propose observation of the agents O and belief of agents B to try to interpret the agent's behavior. And this agent model usually is formulated as a Bayesian network. So given this agent model, we can conduct Bayesian inverse planning to try to get the final Pauchy attribution of the target mental variable. So if you look at the question here, the target mental variable is the belief of this agent. It's a linearly get this Pauchy attribution of the belief given the observable information. Now, based on the belief inference given this current initial model, we want to adjust the model by calculating the utility of the model. So utility here kind of try to has certainty of the inference as well as the model complexity. So really you want to have a model that produces very certain final inference, but also has the minimum kind of model complexity here. Particularly, you can use negative entropy of the final inference Pauchy attribution of the target mental variable as a way to measure certainty. So if the model is actually very certain and also is very simple, you can directly produce the final results. But if the inference is not certain, you might want to produce a new model and try to conduct inference again, considering more richer kind of mental representation to try to interpret these agents' behavior better. So in this case, for example, agent's behavior might not only be determined by its belief, but also maybe depending on its goal. So you can introduce this additional goal variable to try to better interpret why agent did certain things in this in a story depicted in the question. All right, so in each one of these steps, including like information extraction, initial model proposal, and a new model added, we can leverage language model to perform very open-ended kind of model proposal. Also, given a kind of a particular agent model, we can also leverage the language model as a backend to automate the Bayesian inverse planning. So traditionally, if you want to do Bayesian inverse planning using a specific kind of agent model, you need to actually, for each one of the different variables here, define a fixed hypothesis space. You also need to manually define each local conditionals in your Bayesian network. Obviously, that's not really a kind of open-ended way to conduct Bayesian inverse planning. So here we want to, for each one of the different variables, instead of manually create or define a very small domain-specific kind of hypothesis space, we use language model to propose a small set of hypotheses from basically an infinite kind of hypothesis space. We can also use language model to estimate each one of these local conditionals without any kind of manual specification. So now you have the hypothesis, you have the local conditionals. You can plug in any of your favorite kind of sampling-based inference algorithm, such as input sampling, sequential Monte Carlo, to produce the final inference result. I want to just note that the final probability here is still explicitly calculated, not through a language model. So you can still kind of leverage the robustness of the probability inference. But because the hypothesis sampling and local condition estimate can be done by a language model, you can also do this kind of probability inference in a very open-ended way. Finally, when you have multi-model inputs, we can also leverage Bayesian model to extract state and action information from each domain, and then really kind of combine them together in a text form to get the coherent observed human behavior, which will be then fed to outcome as the input. All right, so we first test these outcome methods on different kinds of theorem reasoning benchmarks. So these are really very diverse kind of benchmarks that show different kind of style, different kind of mental inference problems, different number of agents, or even like different kind of modalities as inputs. And really you want to propose different kinds of agent models in order to successfully but also efficiently solve each of the problems in these different benchmarks. So we use GPT-4o as our backend language model and compare that against large language models and also large reasoning models. And really we can see a kind of consistent kind of performance from our methods across different kind of benchmarks. But this actually doesn't really tell you the full story. So if you look deeper and compare the performance of different methods on the different action types. So on the right-hand side, you have harder kind of theorem reasoning problems, such as higher order kind of belief inference or goal inference. You really can see more and more kind of benefit by using model-based kind of inference. So for example, for single agent goal inference, which is probably the one most important kind of mental state inference probably you're going to solve for building an agent that can help people, because you have to actually infer human skill before you can help a human. So for this kind of single agent goal inference questions, reasoning model really still struggle a lot, but you really can see a lot of performance improvement from use of autocomp method. Crucially, autocomp doesn't really increase the computational cost. So you can think about autocomp as a different way to do inference time scaling by proposing different kind of agent models, and then conduct Bayesian inference by proposing hypotheses about the mental state, potential mental states. But this kind of inference time scaling doesn't really increase actual compute if you compare that with recent reasoning models. All right, so now we have talked about how we can actually form a coherent mental picture from others using multi-model input, but that kind of reasoning has to also support downstream decision-making tasks. So we also apply all the time to embodied kind of tasks where you have a main agent that try to perform a typical kind of household task. So for example, this could be any household task like say setting up a table, put grocery to the fridge, prepare a simple meal. It usually takes the manager a very long time to perform a single task. What we want to do is to build helper agents that does not know manager's true goal, but can try to infer manager's goal by watching manager's action, and then try to help this inferred goal, so that the manager can reach the goal faster. So the main agent is going to be controlled by human, help agent is controlled by AI. We evaluate the performance of the help agents by first calculating how long it will take main agent alone to achieve tasks. And then we're going to see how long it will take both agents working together to achieve the same task. Comparing two lenses, then we can compute the speed up provided by the help agent. So we use the different kind of model for TMR reasoning to try to infer main agent's goal in an online manner. So you look at a bit actions of these from the main agent, do goal inference once, you observe more action, you update your goal inference. Another way, we use the same helping planner to generate helping actions given the produced inference or online goal inference result from different TMR reasoning models. So we can compare that with monitor with NLP models such as GPT-4, as well as kind of random baselines. So you can see that our performance is a lot better than the language model based on inference. And then crucially, for reasoning models, we cannot even use reasoning models to do this goal inference, because every time you ask it to do goal inference once, it's going to take 1 to 2 minutes. By the end of the inference, human already finished the task. So this really, this is just really too slow for real-time decision making. Let me see how much time do I have. I have a little bit of time. Okay, so we can also not only provide physical assistance, but also proactive kind of communication. Particularly, this is very useful when you have uncertainty in your inference, or you want to share information that you think the other agents need to know. You can also try to ask questions about where things are if you don't know where, if you haven't found these objects yet. So we can also use our mental state inference to support this kind of communication. Particularly, we propose algorithm called goal-oriented mental alignment to produce very efficient communication messages. So we think about this problem as optimization problem to minimize the misalignment between two minds. So in cooperation case, the ultimate case scenario is both agents share the same mind. They know exactly which other is going to do, so they have this shared kind of joint plan in their mind. But that's not the case. Human and robot obviously have different kind of minds. So we can leverage our mental state inference capacity to detect this kind of misalignment and try to come up with the most efficient communication to minimize this kind of gap between the joint plan in both agents' minds. So we can now use a study where we ask people to work with different kind of agents that will generate different kind of communication messages. And we ask them to selectively rate how good a help agent is, driven by different kind of models. So particularly, I want to highlight two results. The green bar here is a language model driven by GPT-4o, a language model-based agent driven by GPT-4o. The red bar is an agent driven by our mental state inference models. So you can see that the language model baseline really generates the most messages. It actually costs the most, but people really didn't find it useful. In fact, people find it this useful, even worse than the kind of agent that doesn't even know, doesn't even try to infer humans go. All right, so that's one example. Recently, we also apply our method to real-world robots. This is just one of the examples. So for example, in very simple cases where you want to instruct the robot to do some task for you, but then if you have the noisy speech, speech recognition will produce all kinds of errors that will lead to failed kind of human robot instruction following assistance. So here we will actually demonstrate that if you have multimodal data reasoning capacity, like the ones we build in AutoHome, this can really make the instruction following inference a lot more robust, even if you have very noisy, unclear speech. So what we did here is we asked people to come into a comment, just come up with any recipe they want to make in an open-ended way. We asked them to play their favorite music in the background, so you have a lot of noise. And during the meal process, they may instruct the robot to pick out some of ingredients so that they don't need to actually go find those ingredients themselves. So it has found out the robot can really pick up the necessary ingredient that the human needs by understanding its instructions through this kind of background noise. If you just deploy like a most recent kind of multimodal language model such as Gemini 2.5 Pro, it doesn't really perform that well. But with our kind of multimodal deep learning capacity, robot really can double its success rate. Alright, so I just want to do a quick summary. So we show that you can actually benefit a lot from a model-based kind of multimodal deep learning model, and by finding the minimum kind of agent models to interpret human behavior, you can reach kind of robust inference, but also very efficient inference by following the reconstructional kind of principle here. Alright, with that I want to thank you again, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great.
Thank you, Tianmin.
Who's maybe I'll just talk over this side. Okay. Yeah. Thanks very much, Tianmin. We think we have time for questions. We might need to have someone ask a question to come up to the laptop because I'm not sure the room audio will go otherwise. But so I think then one question that would be interesting, Tianmin, is about thinking about your work where you're using theory of mind to understand intent of agents. And the work you showed at the end with a human-robot collaboration, this would be in the context of a case where the AI is trying to infer the human's intent in order to help them. I think there's an overlap with other applications where you need to infer the intent, but maybe going back to your very first intro example where you had the person taking the chair away from another person, thinking about the differences between inferring intent when the intent is inherently good or inferring intent where maybe that intent has some possibility of harm or is otherwise unsafe. I was just wondering, are there strict differences between those two, or will the same framework be able to capture both of these, or are there any differences?
Yeah, it's actually not many differences here. The only difference is that you need to imagine different ways in which people may want to cause harm, given this ill intent. Because we have this agent simulation, so we have to simulate, imagine harmful actions given kind of bad intent, I guess. So methodology-wise, it doesn't really make a difference. I do think there's actually value. We haven't really done that yet, but value in recognizing harmful kind of intentions, even like a human-robot interaction case. You don't want robot to cause harm, but if human want to cause harm to robot or to other humans, you want to also recognize that.
Excellent. Yeah. Thanks for answering my question. And I think with that, we'll probably conclude the second session. Let's thank Tianmin one more time for his great talk. Thanks, Tianmin. And with that, I believe we are now adjourning for our lunch break. We'll resume programming again in about an hour or so for session 3. So, thank you.
Very
very informative. I want to see if there's something. I don't know if they bring it through there, but if they run out, we might just go in yeah, we can do that. How are you? Good to see you. Yeah. Right, I had to miss the first part of this with I at least now the last 3 talks. Nice. Yeah. I think I've been thinking, like, sometimes I do work in terms of multi-function robot that try to do multiple things, and I do mention that can be framed as a resource constraint. Robot for doing that. I thought I would combine what you're
So what do you mean by multiple?
yeah, it's more like if we have some constraints in the environment, or what have something like, let's say you pull out 2 objects or something, insert them,
Right.
then I can get some of the environment constraints that maybe it's more efficient for the robot to like grasp it and get like one object other than pull out the second one right away instead of like pulling it out and then waiting a little bit and then change. I'm trying to roughly, it's not the most perfect fit, but I'm thinking about getting like concepts of resource constraints.
So you are trying to, is it a long horizon task or is it a?
It's more like multi-step, but not like it. I'm trying to think about robots that do things like they use part of their body and open something to stabilize them, and then that leaves room in them to grab something. But if they didn't do that, then the door would just close on them.
I see. Yeah, I think there is a lot of work in, I guess, contact rich manipulation where you use your entire arm to do that.
Shall we see what? I don't know what we're gonna.
I think there is box lunch. So,
Are you only here? You're only here for today? Oh yeah. Yeah.
I'm Shiva, by the way.
My name is Steve. We did or nice to meet you.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Well, here, how close do you work here? How close do you?
Just like 16 minutes away by metro.
Okay.
Happy to see you. Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna mute the live stream, Tony.
Okay, sounds good. It's getting a little late on the East Coast, so I might just sign off in a little bit more, unless you think there's things that you'd like
I
me
have
to
a
do.
slide that's like lunch break. I wonder how that would work. Oh, if you give it to me, I can share that. How about that?
Say that again.
I can share a slide that says it's the lunch break.
Yeah, I guess you can just share it on Zoom. Okay, which means we should also eat. I'm very hungry. Wait, why is the mic? Or should I stop screaming and create a new one for the second part?
I think either way we're gonna probably chop it up into talks. So like I think it's fine.
Well, we
to
lost.
stop.
So should I just stop streaming?
Yeah. Well, what would be the concern if we stop?
We'll have to create a separate stream for the next session.
Oh, I know, but that just means it gets saved to a different
Yeah.
file.
Yeah.
Well, I think either way we still have to process everything.
Okay.
So like I think you just